My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas.
I've been waiting a long time to say this. Neil Oliver, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Oh, I'm delighted. Yes, the longer this attritional war goes on, it's been 6 years for me now, but I generally jump on every opportunity to talk. Whenever someone makes contact with me and wants a conversation, I'm more than happy to be the other half of it.
I've been struggling, though, for years to get you on. I'm not quite sure why. It might just be the fact that I've had the wrong contact details all along.
Yeah, I do. I obviously just recently there I did another conversation with James Dellingpole on the.
He's a friend of mine.
Yeah, me too. So we've got that mutual connection, and then he subsequently said that you were looking to connect with me. So really, that was the first time I became aware that you wanted to make contact with me. So I just said yes. And then you said that we also had another mutual friend in common. That's Nick Hudson, your fellow South African. Yeah, who I've been talking to Nick now for years, ever since goodness knows, through his pan data. All these your researches and study of what was going on during the COVID debacle. So I've known Nick for years. So by what means we've managed to not make contact is mysterious.
It is. But now listen, so because this is your first time on my show, I know you've been on UK Column before, and this obviously is for UK Column, or haven't you? I think you have.
Not, I couldn't deny it. But obviously, like you, I've been a guest on so many different platforms. I don't remember them all, but I may well have done. I'm certainly very aware of UK Column. Whether or not I've actually been interviewed or taken, but I couldn't say either way.
Well, because this is your first time then on my show, I just want to go through a little bit of your background, just because it's so interesting. You're actually an archaeologist. How cool is that?
1,000 years ago, really. I left school in the 80s and I went to Glasgow University and I studied for a degree in archaeology. It just appealed to me. I was always interested in things, historical and so on, and archaeology seemed like a really good, slightly different avenue to go down. And I worked then. I got my degree and I worked as a digger. For a few years I excavated numerous sites, and then I stopped. I found that I couldn't make any money. Basically, it was a fascinating subject, but it was very difficult to make a living. So I retrained then at that point. I suppose I was probably in my early mid-20s. I retrained as a journalist. I joined a local newspaper in the southwest of Scotland where I grew up. And I qualified again. I did a 3-year indenture with them, and they trained me up, and I got shorthand and typing and all of this stuff of a cub reporter. And then I went off in a slightly different direction. But over the years, archaeology and history came back in, and by the end of the millennium, around 99, 2000, I stumbled into television. And the television that I ended up making for quite a long time was about history and archaeology. So I kind of, I took a detour and then ended up back in the same place.
When it comes to archaeology, I've come to the conclusion that most of what we understand about history is just wrong.
You go straight into the number one rabbit hole there for me. Yeah, I was like you. 2020 was definitely the turning point year for me. By which point, let's say, where are we now? I was 53, I suppose, in 2020. So I'd been around the houses, as we say, and I thought I knew stuff, and I had always been interested in history and archaeology, but I depended on what I had been taught. I went to a state school in Scotland, just a regular school, and then I went to university and I listened to what I was told, and I, qualified and passed exams in that. But by now, 6 years into this new perspective, I've begun to rethink everything. Absolutely. I'll be honest, I'm not making this up. I was always open to what might have been called, I suppose, alternative interpretations of history. To pass your exams and get the degree and whatever, you follow a line. You keep in your lane, broadly speaking. But I was always interested in the sort of Erich von Däniken and, more recently, obviously, the thinking and writing of people like Graham Hancock. I've never really been a dyed-in-the-wool academic. I went to uni like, millions of my cohort from school, but I didn't then go on to do higher degrees and any of that. And that meant that I was less likely, I suppose, to remain railroaded and only listening to other academics. Because I went out into the world of journalism, or just out into the world in general, I was listening to and I was watching stuff on television and I was reading other books. So I was always aware of alternative interpretations. Now that's a long way around. I've taken a bit of a detour again there, but by now, I think that the really what bothers me more than anything else is the timeline. There's an accepted orthodox timeline. You're born of, everything, geology, radiocarbon dating, thermoluminescence dating, dendrochronology, which is, tree ring dating. There's an established, in inverted commas, timeline. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And it all happened within this period of time, whatever. By now, I don't just accept that timeline. That's my main problem. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. So by now, because I've been, I now proudly wear the hat of, the tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist thing. I've long since...
Hi.
Yeah, pleased to meet you. I've long since shrugged off any concern. In fact, I feel if you're not tarred with that brush, then you're not trying hard enough. And so now that I've relaxed into that persona, I don't care who knows, and I don't care about other people's opinion of what I think, or at least what I'm open to considering. So a whole new wide vista has opened up for me in the last 6 years, and I've done some fascinating reading and listening.
The COVID era was a disaster for the world in many ways. I mean, people were locked down, and it was just an absolute catastrophe. But knowing what you know now, Neil, would you go back to 2019?
No. Hard no. It was difficult. It was like a slap in the face or a punch in the face. Being, initially labelled as whatever, anti this, anti that, anti-vaxxer, COVID denier, granny killer was the start of it. But then that developed as I looked at other things into whatever, conspiracy theorist, anti-Semite, whatever. I've been called it. You name it, I've been called it. And it hurt to begin with, but then I always use the analogy of, the fear of the first punch in the face is worse than the first punch in the face. Once you get the punch in the face, you're like, oh, right, that's what it's like to get a punch in the face. And the subsequent blows still hurt, but they don't take you by surprise in the way that the first punch in the face did. And so I don't... I've also used the analogy of shedding a shell like a crab. And you go through that, presumably a crab goes through that period where it's defenceless because it's soft again. But then you grow a different shell, a bigger shell that lets you be bigger, and so on and so on. And that's the process. You want to keep growing. So I think that's where I've been. It was a shock to me. Heaven help me, I was a kind of a member of the lesser establishment here in the UK. Because I was presenting the kind of television I was, which was soft, kind of BBC documentary series about the landscape and about history and archaeology and so on. Charities and others approach you and ask you to represent them, to be a face. And I was, I represented a few charities. I was also for a while there the president of the National Trust for Scotland. I had been invited to become, and was very briefly, a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, which is one of those sort of august societies, for your academic intellectual types. And you know, and I was a known face, and then because of what I started to say around COVID, and then everything else, like the war in Ukraine, like the climate crisis hoax,
Gaza.
Gaza, you know, the genocide, and all of the rest of it, merely taking a stance where I was saying, "Are we sure about this?" Really, I mean, I was just really. Wait a minute, hang on. There seems to be an alternative way of interpreting these events. Could we, you know, maybe we should look at that. You know, so I got so battered by that, and then I was dropped by everyone. All those little accretions that I had gathered around me. I was dropped by every charity. I was dropped as the president of the National Trust for Scotland. I was challenged by the members, the fellows of the Royal Society of Edinburgh to apologise. I can't even remember now what specifically I had said. But anyway, I was asked to recant, and I said, no, I'll just leave. And I left. I think I'm probably the person with the briefest tenure of fellowship of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. It must have been months, literally. And so my agent dropped me. Everyone dropped me. My newspaper column ended. I doubt if I'll ever work for terrestrial television again. You know, and so all of that has happened to me. But you asked the question, do I regret it? 100% hard no, because I'm content that I did right in saying what I said. I wanted to say what I said, and I don't regret saying what I said. So there's and happily, very happily, my wife, you know, we've been together for a long time. We've known each other since we were teenagers, and my wife never missed a beat either. So she was always on the same page, as we say. And my kids, managed to keep our kids away from the jabs. They didn't take any of that. And that, for me, that's achievement number one. The fact that Trudy and I, my wife, became even tighter as a unit, and the fact that we kept our kids away from that bioweapon, if nothing else had happened, I would still be content that I did right.
Well, I mean, I also wouldn't go back to 2019. My child was born sort of post-COVID, and we struggled for a long time to fall pregnant. And if it weren't for the COVID era, my child would not be vaccinated. In other words, hang on, have I got that the right way around? My child is not vaccinated. Let me put it like that.
Your child is not, yeah.
Yeah, and he's healthier as a result. Now, if you had asked me in 2019, I would have said, absolutely, he's going to get vaccinated. So I'm very grateful.
Full disclosure, I mean, Trudy and I, our kids are older. I mean, my eldest is 22, soon to be 23, and my youngest is 18, and my middle boy is 20. Back in the day, we got them MMR'd. You know, you get that's the measles, mumps, and rubella.
Yeah, I was also as a kid.
My mum and dad got me and my sisters jabbed with whatever was offered up at the Times back decades ago, and when the MMR thing came along, we did that. We got the kids jabbed, and now mercifully, as far as we can tell, you know, dodged a bullet on that one. I don't know, but if I had my time again with 2020 hindsight, we wouldn't, and Trudy says the same, we would absolutely not let a needle anywhere near them at any point. And, you know, but there we go, here we are. My awakening, I put a lot of it down to just, it wasn't that I was pro-jab, really, not really. It was just that I wasn't paying attention. And the MMR was just another thing you did. Here's this date in the calendar, you get your kids jabbed. And that didn't, God forgive me, we went along with the orthodoxy. Everybody around us seemed to be getting the same thing, so we just went along with it. I've done that. And I've said, you know, when people come at me now about, oh, you didn't used to say this and you didn't used to say that. Absolutely I didn't. I accept that completely, but you only, to use the common parlance, waking up when you're waking up. In this instance, if someone, you can slap and shake someone, whatever, but you can't waken someone else up. The other person has to waken up by themselves. You know, it's not like, you know, the true love's first kiss for Sleeping Beauty, and you're waking up. You're waking up when you're waking up, and I woke up in 2020. And I hold my hand up and say the things I did and what I thought before 2020 was different. I don't apologise for it. It's just where I was. And now I think differently. And, that's it.
That's a very interesting point that you're making. You said you woke up in 2020. So, would you say that was your Damascus moment? Because many people have had a series of moments over the years that have kind of turned the light bulb on. For me, for example, I believed the 9/11 story for the longest time. The climate change story I believed also until around 2009 when I watched a documentary called The Great Global Warming Swindle, which really got me rethinking that. But still, no real huge Damascus moments for me until around 2020.
Yes, I suppose what you make me think of there is, I used to travel a lot with work. I flew all over the world to make television. And it was my habit when I checked into a hotel to go into the room and turn the television on. You find the remote and switch it on. But I didn't watch it. I just wanted the background noise. It was like company in the room. So it was on, and I knew it was on, and I could hear it, but I wasn't sitting down and paying attention to it. And when it comes to the first 5 decades of my life and everything that was going on, it was like that. The MMR, let's say, because we've just mentioned it, was just on in the background. And I just, without analysing it, without sitting down and looking at MMR, I just went along with it. And I think probably that's the intended effect of the orthodoxy. Most people, certainly myself, without paying attention, I just got bumbled along. I was distracted by what I was doing. I was busy with my work. I was busy with my family life and all its attendant, business. And I didn't really look. And like you say, 9/11 happened. I thought, oh my God, oh right, what happened there? Oh right, some terrorists hijacked planes and crashed them into the World Trade Center. My goodness.
Yeah, those Muslims.
Aye, I mean, but I didn't analyse it particularly. And things like when Britain joined with, when Tony Blair and George Bush went to war in Iraq, Trudy often talks about the fact that we were in a hospital in London you remember there was a footage of the Saddam Hussein statue getting pulled over by a crowd. When that was happening, Trudy had just had the first of 3, as it turned out, emergency caesarean sections, right? So we were in that. That was what was preoccupying us, and that was happening literally, television in the background. We didn't bother to think, should we have? Why have we gone to war? It was there in the background, like that company in a hotel room when you're on your own. It was just a hiss in the background that was better than silence. You say when you first... I do look back now. I remember, obviously, in Britain, the royal family has always been a big deal in Britain. Birthdays, coronations, weddings, huge coverage of all of those events. And I do remember when Diana, Princess of Wales, died in that incident. I remember for the first time, I was... looking at it on the television and in the newspapers, and I remember thinking, that's weird. Obviously, it was a tragedy that a young mum had died, as it is when a young mum dies. That's a terrible sadness for the family. But, I didn't know that woman personally, and while I could empathise with the grief, I could understand why her nearest and dearest would be as upset as you would expect. The national outpouring, men in the streets tearing their clothes and howling and wailing, and the mountains of flowers and all of the rest of it. I remember thinking at that point, an early inkling that this feels like brainwashing of some. This feels like a collective madness. This feels like some sort of collective hysteria that people are just being swept along by, as though by a torrent, a sudden flash flood on a river. But without a doubt, my Damascene moment, and it wasn't really even as dramatic as that, when the lockdown happened, I still thought Trudy was worried about the kids. Our kids were still at school at that point, and suddenly we were being told about the Black Death was coming out of the east via Italy, and everybody was going to die, going to be bodies heaped in the streets. And we thought, oh my God! And for the first couple of weeks of the lockdown, we thought, oh well, maybe we should. Maybe that's the right thing to do, just to see what happens. It's like when you hear a shout in the street and you put your hands over your head, what is it? And then, the moment passes and you have a look around. So for the first couple of weeks, we thought, well, maybe that's the right thing to do. But we're self-employed, broadly speaking, and every means by which I had ever earned a living stopped. Everything, I couldn't work in lockdown. And so, the reality of the situation was that we first began to be opposed to it because we simply thought we're going to lose the house. And also, as the time went on, we realised that we weren't seeing anyone die. So the two things,
Yes.
we thought the wheelbarrows are not being pushed up and down the street, with the lifeless bodies of the neighbours getting loaded and taken away. So there wasn't anything.
There were no ambulance sirens either.
No, there was nothing. So there was a period of where you thought, well, we're still locked down. They're still telling us that it's the Black Death, but I'm not seeing anything. And it was a gradual process. Trudy and I were looking at each other going, the Black Death may or may not be here, but we're going to lose the house anyway. And that'll be something much more direct to worry about. And so, and then of course, then it went on, and by 2021, the blue envelopes were coming through the door saying, "Come and get your injection, come and get your so-called vaccine." And again, without any particular rebellious feeling, Trudy and I just looked at one another and thought, "No, I mean, I don't know anybody with COVID. I certainly don't know anybody who's died of COVID. So I don't think there's any." We didn't take it. And we literally sort of were of the opinion that we'll just wait and see. Maybe as the years go on, we might review the situation. But in the short term, we don't need that. But then, having made that, thank goodness, decision, and also having persuaded the kids as time went on that you don't need to do this. My son wanted back to the gym. My daughter was worried about not being able to socialise with friends. But we said, just wait. And they did, mercifully. But then, of course, it became more and more apparent that the jabs were dangerous. Whatever, we could down that road if you want. But, we thought, right, oh, thank goodness we didn't do that. And then we realised, as the time went on, that, well, I still don't know anyone who died of COVID, but there is a metaphorical pile of dead that I'm aware of, and it's people that died of heart attacks and strokes and sudden cancers out of a clear blue sky. People in their 40s and 50s who'd been fit and well suddenly had sort of late stage cancers and were swept away within weeks and whatever. And we thought, right, that's a sinister thing. There's something badly wrong there.
It's just coincidence, Neil.
Yeah. So you talk about a Damascene moment. It was much, much more gradual, and that for me, it was for Trudy and I. It was. I mean, where we are now, we think this was malign, this was evil. We are surrounded by psychopathic paedophiles, but we got there by a long process of just initially lifting our heads up and having a look around to assess the situation, and it's become, well, We've arrived at at the point where we are, but it was not overnight. It was not a Damascene moment. I'm
in 100% agreement with you regarding the vaccines. In fact, not just the COVID, but all vaccines, I now think are pretty risky.
Me too.
To various degrees. I do not see the necessity for absolutely any vaccine at all. Nothing.
Me too.
Yeah, so, and that's, again, thanks to the COVID era. And for me, it'll always go down as a great learning experience. I remember believing the official story in early 2020. I thought, okay, there is this virus that's spreading. I remember that whole northern Italy thing. Remember they said people traveled from China or something, and then Trump wanted to stop all flights to and fro China or something like that. And I thought, okay, maybe there's some new disease or something. But then in March, when half the world just coincidentally, Neil, started locking down their citizens and announcing the same stuff.
Yes.
And using the same terminology. Had you ever heard the term social distancing in your life?
No, and I certainly had heard lockdown before, but only in the context of prison movies. A riot would be starting to break out and they would lock down, whatever, throw everybody into their wee cells in Alcatraz and and that was a lockdown. I knew what a lockdown was in that context, and only that context. And yes, it was that was part of the gradual process, was hearing everyone, whatever, Boris Johnson, Joe Biden, the French leader, the German leader, all across the place, Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, King Charles, all using the same sentences.
Jacinda.
Flatten the curve. Yeah, Jacinda, the horror show that unfolded in Australia, Prison Island, and in New Zealand. But that build back better, flatten the curve, save the NHS, window of opportunity. And people were starting to put together those montages on social media where you could see 1,000 news anchors all saying the same sentence. And you think, that's really weird. That's, that never happens. Nick Hudson, already name-checked him. I mean, Nick came up with, at some point, the Hudson's razor, as he called it, echoing Occam's razor, where he said, if something's being presented as a global threat with a single solution to which everyone must adhere, unquestioning and in lockstep, and thirdly, if you're not allowed to question that version of events, if you can tick those three boxes, according to Hudson's razor, you're dealing with a scam. And that I've remembered that ever since. That resonated very strongly with me, and it applies to what we were told about the war in Ukraine, what we've been told about the climate crisis, what we've been told about net zero, Agenda 20, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, whatever it is. It's the same. You can tick all three boxes for that. And I thought, yes, that is right. So we're being, all the time, as it turns out, we are scammed. But I think what happened, and I don't know why it happened, because you would think, long experience of that sort of Fabian society model of softly catchy monkey, slow, the tortoise rather than the hare, gradual, which had obviously been working, gradually, whatever, boiling the frog by very slowly, keeping the heat under it. I don't understand why at some point in 2020, well, I do have theories, but clearly they suddenly ramped everything up. The analogies would be they suddenly stamped on the accelerator pedal. They suddenly cranked the flame under the boiling frog up from low to hot. I don't understand why that happened, because the net effect of them suddenly galloping towards the finishing line was that people like me, and there's nothing special about me, I'm a regular person. In my Cub Reporter training days, my editor said, you represent the reasonable man. That's your job. You're not too, it's like the Goldilocks thing. You're not too smart, you're not too stupid. You're just a reasonable guy. And your responsibility is to look at events and ask the things that a reasonable guy would ask. When, how, what, where, who. Basic questions. And then once you've got that information, then see where you are. See if you can, how would you assess that situation based on those simple, reasonable questions? And I thought what they did after 2020, for whatever reason, when they stamped on the gas pedal, it woke up people like me. Not too smart, not too stupid, just reasonable. Turned out, it looks as though a third of the world or a third of the people offered the jabs didn't take them. That's huge. If that's true, if 1 in 3 people for whatever reasons, said no to that. That's enormous. So what fascinates me is the fact that they did stamp on the gas pedal in 2019. Now, I think I know why, but for me, that was amazing to me, because it's like centuries of careful boiling of the frog were suddenly thrown out the window.
Hang on. I want to take a brevity break for a second. This analogy of the frog being boiled. Do you know anybody who's ever boiled a frog?
Exactly. I mean, you raise a good point. I mean, anyway, if you look it up, people will tell you, a frog always jumps out of the water when it gets too warm. So, but if you continue the analogy, you can put a lid on it. Yes. You can put a lid on the frog. So even though the frog realizes it's being boiled to death, there's nothing it can do about it because it's too late. I suppose to torture the analogy, I suppose with something like, whatever, lockdown and jabs and the rest of it, they possibly were metaphorically attempting to put the lid on the pot, but they didn't.
What do you think, Neil? What do you think was and is going on?
Well, I think it's always about money. You go back thousands of years. It's about gold. It's about who's got the gold. Where is it? Wars being fought for control of the medium of exchange, if you like, which was gold for the longest time. And more recently it's been about oil. All the half the wars are about securing access to the valuable, that which is desirable. I think, so that's the driving force. It's banal. Hannah Arendt, in covering the Eichmann trial, said, the banality of evil. That when you get right down to it, with someone like Eichmann, he's just a bureaucrat just doing his job. But what manifests with that mindset of just doing your job is unspeakable, whatever. So, and that's a whole other rabbit hole to go down. But anyway, that it's a useful way of thinking. That I think, in answer to your question, it boils down to money. Now, people know what I'm just using the word money as a shorthand. I mean, I know there's, you can debate endlessly exactly what the difference is between money and currency and so on and so on. I think I think during the from 2010 onwards, I think, just to put a rough estimate on, I think what began to emerge for the controlling elite that were accustomed to being the people empowered to create money out of nothing and then to control its flow, printing money, quantitative easing, fractional reserve banking, and so on and so on. That was just a late stage manifestation of what had been there for thousands of years, which was the powerful controlled the wealth. I think what began to manifest from about 2010 onwards was some kind of unexpected existential threat, a financial existential threat. Something,
Debt.
Well, we could talk about that till the cows come home. But I think what manifest for the powerful was a threat to their financial control. And you need money to pay for the armies that do your bidding, to bribe the people that you want to do your bidding, to pay for everything. You need money. And I think there was a burgeoning threat to that position. I think it's still there. An existential threat is like, kind of an extinction level event, which I think is still in the air, as it were, and that the powerful haven't got on top of it. And so I think what happened in 2019 was a decision was taken that we need to get ourselves a breathing space, said the wealthy, powerful, controlling, to each other. And so the lockdown and the scamdemic, the fake pandemic, and so aided and abetted by the background noise of the climate crisis hoax. The world's about to catch fire if we don't, give up our cars and all the rest of it. I think all of that was a response to the need to give themselves time. How do you shut the world down? How do you stop everything? Well, lockdown and put people in their houses in fear of some invisible threat. And, you know, and so we're now 6 years later. And to some extent, I think that we're still in a situation where the powerful are trying to get back on control. And everything we're seeing, war in Ukraine, because COVID began to run out of steam for them. It didn't have the effect anymore, mostly because people weren't dying of it. They certainly weren't dying of that. And so, you know, miraculously, war in Ukraine appeared, which is now a forever war with First World War death tolls associated with it. I mean, it's a proper horror. And it has enabled the European puppets to threaten conscription and, you know, boots on the ground in Ukraine for their sons and daughters. So that's there. And then always the climate crisis, you know, the horror show in the Middle East, you know, up to and including, you know, now Iran, the threat of nuclear war, World War III. I think what you're looking at is an increasingly desperate attempt to buy more time until the powerful can get back in control of the wealth with the surveillance state, the digital cage, digital ID, you know, central bank digital currencies. I think the sort of stuff that Catherine Austin Fitz, you know, she frightened the living daylights out of me when I started listening to her years ago, because I thought, oh God, I can recognise that. I can see what you're talking about there. I don't understand the maths or the arithmetic, but I see what you mean. I think that's all to play for at the moment. And partly, I think the reason where I do think that this desperate attempt to finally put the lid on the pot and boil the frog to death will fail, because they cannot solve that existential financial problem. It's just getting bigger and bigger and more obvious.
I have to ask, because you emphasized they. Who is they?
Well, I think when it comes to they, we are all of us raised for the longest time to believe that we belong to countries, independent nation states that have their independent, you know, identities and cultures and religions and languages, and that we have our, you know, sort of geopolitical needs and wants, which we think that we elect our leaders to champion on our behalf. So you've got people that think that they're American, think they're British, South African, French. And that is a fundamental of how we are kept in our boxes. We are the British, we need this. We are the Americans, put America first. Keeps people in a mindset. But I think that one of the keys that lets you out, that sets you free, is when you realise that they don't have any of those allegiances. So the people that are they, which is to say the people who do make the big decisions, are not, they don't belong anywhere or identify with any identity. And I think the reality is that all of the people that are really making decisions for America, for South Africa, for Britain, for France, for everywhere, they are kindred spirit. They are they. They share an intention to just mislead the mass of the population while they go about the business of getting what they want. You know, so, I mean, the evidence is there. You know, if you go back, let's say, into the 20th century, just past, you know, that if you dig around a little bit, you realise that, you know, let's say the rise of Hitler and Mussolini, let's say, was financed by Wall Street. They were the money that enabled the rise of whatever fascism or Nazism. It was Wall Street, and to some extent the Bank of England, that deals were being struck. There was what was kept from the mass of the population at that time was that Ibn Saud in Saudi Arabia, you know, Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, FDR, the interests of those people were all being looked after by the same legal companies, handful of the same banks. they were all doing business with each other. General Electric, General Motors, Ford, whatever, were building trucks and other materials for Adolf Hitler at the same time as they were funding the Allies for D-Day. The same central banks were striking deals with all of the same people, while keeping millions of people in the mistaken belief that there was an adversarial contest going on between America, Britain, and France and the Allies, and Germany. Well, the reality of the situation was that all business was business as usual. It was all about centralising gold. It was about deciding who was going to control oil and other reserves in the Middle East and elsewhere. And the mass of the population was blindsided into thinking that there was a world war going on between distinct sides, when it wasn't like that. And I think that manifestation in the 20th century is just one of many. So you ask me who they are. I do subscribe to the belief that there is just a cohort, a cabal, a cartel, much like a crime family that runs illegal business at the expense of the general population, and from time to time members of the public, get hurt. And from time to time, using the model of a crime syndicate, there are battles for control of that. Everyone's seen the Godfather movie. The mafiosi fight amongst themselves. What you're looking at, there's a good model to look at, I would say, in the Mexican drug cartels at the moment. The terrible violence there, the terrible violence, the decapitations, the flayings alive, the terrible stuff that's going on in Mexico is because there's a civil war raging within the Sinaloa cartel. Different factions within that cartel are fighting for control of the business. And that violence will get worse and worse and worse until eventually one faction or another has won and wiped out the other faction. And I think, we're seeing that. You see that as well. That's why, you get flashpoints, because they don't all agree. They are a criminal cartel. And if you keep that image in your head of, they certainly treat us like the mass of the population, we're just, idiots that go to work, pay our taxes, and abide by the law. But they know that that's just for them. We're good fellas. We're mafia. We don't do any of that. We do what we want. And from time to time, they fight amongst themselves. And I think maybe we're in the midst of one of those civil wars where sides are fighting for dominance, but none of it's got our interests at heart. We're just mooks. We're just the sheep, the cattle, we don't matter.
Yeah, and I think to feed into what you're saying, Neil, is I would also add that there's a sense of complexity that a lot of people around us seem to willfully ignore. I really get annoyed by the sort of myopic "it's the Jews" narrative, because it is extremely simplistic and it ignores history.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what part of it is that the malign force, the crime syndicate or whatever, cloaks itself. It's never in plain sight. It's always disguised. It's taking advantage of human shields. During the Iraq War and whatever with Saddam Hussein and the human shields, we learned about that concept of, the baddies standing behind innocent people, because the idea was that, the other side would be less likely to shoot at you through women and children. Although, plainly that doesn't apply at all. Not when the truly ruthless are concerned. So there are different things to hide behind, and the notion of, let's blame everything on the Jews is a choreographed sleight of hand, that's one way in which you can distract people by what's really going on. Distract people about what's really going on. I mean, it goes without saying that people who worship, whose religion is Judaism, the very idea that all of those people, and let's remember that Judaism takes in people of, all colours, all sexualities. It's a faith. The very idea that those people are collectively, responsible for all the trouble in the world is nonsense. But of course, that at the moment that I think the use of the label anti-Semite or anti-Semitic has been worn through. That was a very effective weapon for a long time. To be accused of anti-Semitism was like being accused of being a paedophile, and it was a terrible thing to be accused of. But it's been so overused and misapplied, it doesn't really matter anymore. It doesn't. So something. I mean, so I think that the use of that thing that's been, the use of that, I think, actually is wearing out and will be replaced by something else. So yes, I mean, like you, I mean, absolutely. To say that it's the Jews it's just a nonsense. That's not the thing. That they are just that controlling cartel, and they are neither Jewish nor Muslim nor Christian. They are neither unified black nor white nor brown. They are neither gay nor straight. They are that separation of the cartel from the rest of us cuts vertically. It doesn't cut horizontally. You don't go, oh well, he's Jewish, so he must be a baddie. It's in the same way that, oh, he's gay, he must be a baddie. Oh, he's American, he must be a baddie. Or he's, whatever. He's Iranian, he must be a baddie. That's nonsense. But some of them are.
Ginger. Unless he's a ginger.
It's like that thing about, all thumbs are fingers, but not all fingers are thumbs. Do you know what I mean? It's like people just get, there's always a label. There's always a label. Oh, it's the fault of the... And that
it's a cop-out.
Oh, yeah.
It's a cop-out.
And it is. I mean,
it's intellectually lazy.
It's completely intellectually lazy. I mean, it's almost a cliche now, but everyone truly is, generally, you're able to say, I've got friends of all sorts. I've got Muslim friends that I love. I've got Jewish friends. I've got gay friends. I've got American friends. I've got women friends. I've got male friends. I mean, my group of people, about whom I care, it's not determined by any of these labels. That's all I can say. And I certainly don't think you cannot boil it down and say, right, this group, this identity group, whatever it is. These gay people or these Muslim people or these Jewish people, it's always them. The trouble cuts. It's like Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, the line separating good and evil passes through every human heart.
Yeah,
that's nearer to the mark.
Yeah, but you made a good point earlier when you said that you have these competing factions within the oligarchy. That's exactly right. This is why a lot of their attempts for globalism, for mass surveillance, for vaccine rollouts fail, because they are fighting with amongst themselves. You have the UN and the Fabians, and you have the Jesuits, and you have black nobility, and you have the royal classes, and you have the NGOs like Bill Gates, and you have all these factions, and they are fighting amongst themselves.
Well, yes, I think there's something. One of the things that I've looked at in the intervening years, has been like a concept like natural law, and the idea of the universe itself. It sort of consciously strives for equilibrium, balance in all things. I mean, we kind of know that in our own individual physical health, it's about balance. Too much, not good. Too little, not good. Balance. And natural law suggests that, a conscious universe wants equilibrium. And so the mistake that they make Now they are for absolutely they are a minority in the same way that the mafia are a minority, or whatever, or any other crime syndicate you want to put. I'm not labeling the crime family that originates from Sicily as the source of all evil either. I'm just using it as a metaphor. But they are outnumbered by the mass of the population, so that's why they have to use subterfuge and trickery, because they are massively they are the few. They are the few, and everybody else is the many. So they have. The analogy, I suppose, would be that in attempting to gain this total control, it takes enormous effort. It's like holding a pendulum at its greatest swing that way, and trying to keep it there forever. Because what the pendulum, in terms of it wants to go, is to swing back, but then eventually hang. The weight wants to be in the middle. It's where it wants to go. Or it's like the enormous effort required to hold a beach ball under the surface of the sea. You can do it, but it takes relentless energy, which is enervating. And eventually the pendulum's going to swing back, and it's going to settle in the middle, and the beach ball is going to erupt onto the surface and then just bob. The universe wants equilibrium, and they are subverting the natural law. They're trying to get to and then forever maintain an inversion of everything that's natural. They will fail. I mean, that's why it will fail. We happen to be living through the period of turmoil and struggle, which is, every now and again, a generation or two is the lucky or unlucky one that goes through that period. But the push to get the total control of everything, everywhere, all the time by a minority will fail by definition.
So it sounds like you're saying that you see a light at the end of the tunnel and not a train coming towards us.
I think, there's so many aspects to it. I don't believe in endings. Hollywood, a lot of us have learned to be suspicious now of the, MK Ultra and the messaging that comes, let's say, out of music, popular music, so-called the programming that's there in the Hollywood movie. And, if you think about it for 5 minutes, movies almost all work towards a happy ending, a conclusion. But you all know, if you watch the end of, I don't know, When Harry Met Sally, or, when the couple get together and everything's going to be happy forever, or Von Ryan's Express, Von Ryan dies on the railway tracks, but his people, escape to freedom, and Steve McQueen, finally gets caught on the barbed wire and whatever. But Hollywood teaches us to think that things come to an end. But you've only got to pause for a moment to think, well, what happens next? There's always next. What is the daily grind like for Harry and Sally now that they're together and married? And they will go on to have good days and bad days like everything else. This idea that things come to an end. I can see how I'm even paranoid about making that symbol with my hands, because there's a whole rabbit hole about that, God help anybody.
Right. You're a Mason.
Yeah, that inadvertently makes a symbol with my hands. I'm signaling my masters. I'm terrified. I should keep my hands in my pockets. But so there are no endings. So you say, is there light at the end of the tunnel? That's what made me think of Von Ryan's Express, Frank Sinatra, and all that. We will get out of this. It will move on to the next phase. There is no ending. Nothing ends. Light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah, so you merge out into the daylight from the tunnel, and then what? That doesn't mean that everything's going to be happy forever after. That you're just on to the next thing. We are coming. Yeah, you might say we're coming through a tunnel at the moment, and for sure the tunnel will come to an end, and we'll come out into the daylight, and then that will present the next generations with something else. They will go on. I think one of the MK Ultra programming things that comes out of Hollywood is the idea that if you just hold it together, you'll get to the end. There is no end. It's just an infinite, endless, timeless process.
That's a very interesting insight. I've never really thought of it like that, Neil. And there's a strange segue right back to my very first question about ancient history, because you mentioned Graham Hancock, and I've interviewed a few of his colleagues. I haven't managed to interview Graham himself.
Neither have I. I've tried to get to Graham and I've never managed. No.
Yeah, he doesn't reply to his emails, but what some of his colleagues have argued is that history is cyclical and doesn't follow a chronological timeline from primitive to advanced, whereas it goes around and around and around. And that,
yeah, it certainly does. It certainly. I think that tends to be the human animal's experience. You know, I think the universe, and again, I'm just using a shorthand there. Let's not get into the whole whatever flat Earth, whatever. Ptolemaic models, Copernican. I just mean, you know what I mean by the universe, the everything, right? I don't think it's cyclical. It's a process without beginning and without end. But I think the human animal, because we are finite, you know, we come from somewhere and then we seem to go away again after a period of minutes or a century. But we tend to come and go. And so I think the experience of the human animal tends to feel like endings and begin, but happy ending, whatever, and whatever, and whatever. So I think that's our predicament. I think that's the predicament of the animal. And for sure, for thousands of years, over and over again, some observant individuals have spotted it. You know, Polybius was Greek and suggested that, you know, in society you get a good king, and then that's great. He's benevolent and benign. And there's a kind of a Camelot period. But then he gets old, dies, and the thing goes down to his son. And his son's not him. He's not as good as him. He's not as clever as him. And so he becomes influenced by the other powerful people around him. So you get, rather than the monarchy, you get the aristocracy, because now power devolves to the aristocracy. And that might be all right for a while as well. But then you get the aristocrats' sons and grandsons, and they're a bit useless as well. They're just born into privilege. And so that becomes unsatisfying for most people. So that becomes an oligarchy, right? It's corrupt. And eventually that goes on for a while, but then the people can't thole it. They can't tolerate that forever. And so there's an overthrowing of the oligarchy, and you get a democracy, which is the people governing themselves. And then that lasts in the first iteration or so. But then that too becomes, people take it for granted. It becomes corrupted as well. And you get the mob. You know, you get the power of the mob, the unthinking mob. And then that's chaotic. That's disastrous. And so that descends into the rise of the demagogue. A sort of Donald Trumpian figure that arrives and seems to promise the solution to all problems. Just trust me and I'll fix it for you. But we all know what happens with demagogues. You know, at base, they're bent. And so that doesn't work. So there's war, chaos. And out of the chaos comes a good king. So now you've gone from 12 o'clock all the way around and you're back. But then the process starts again. Now that's just Polybius. Now that he was not the first and he was not the last to notice that cyclical sensation. You know, anybody that's read or tried to read Finnegan's Wake, you know, James Joyce, great Irish writer, you know, Finnegan's Wake actually begins in the River Run. You know, it begins in the middle of a word, in the middle of a sentence, and within the first paragraph or two, he gives the clue to it's Vicus, but he's name checking Giambattista Vico, who was I think a 17th century philosopher who suggested that all human societies were the same, that they would start with the time of the gods. So you would have people, primitives, emotional, elemental, like Neanderthals, I suppose, who live in fear of the thunder and the lightning, and they take shelter in caves. And then, so that's the first stage. Then you get the time of the rise of a knightly class, an aristocratic. And that period is then characterised by fighting between an elite clique and the mass of the population. And eventually the aristocrats are overthrown and they're replaced by the republic, effectively, the democracy, the rule of the people. But then that fades again for the same reasons that Polybius understands. And then you go back, it becomes the time of the gods again. So, there are multiple examples of observant people noticing, and in Finnegan's Wake, Joyce is nodding to the fact that he understands this. The book is in 3 parts, really, and it's about that constantly repeating cycle. So it's part of the human experience. It's our predicament, so to get back to your original point about Graham Hancock and others suggesting that there are cycles, I think it feels that way for us, because I do think there's a difference between the way things are and the way things feel. There's the way that science describes reality. At the moment, science describes reality a certain way, and we've got, balls in space and us living on them and whatever, and gravity and so on and so on. However, I'm yet to meet anyone who feels it like that. The world, life on Earth feels like flat Earth. What it feels like is being on a stationary thing with everything happening around it. So at one and the same time, you're invited to know what science says. We're on a ball, falling through infinity at tens of thousands of miles an hour and all of the rest of it, and rotating, faster than a speeding bullet. But it doesn't feel like that. What it feels like is flat Earth. That's the feeling. So as human animals, we've got limited perception. We see a certain frequency of light. We've got 5 senses that give us a certain amount of information that really, at best, let us live long enough to procreate, and then you're gone. And with these blunt tools, we're trying to understand everything in the twinkling of an eye. That is the human predicament. One of Terry Pratchett's novels for kids is A Hatful of Sky. And there's a little girl in that called Tiffany Aching. And she's a trainee witch. And at one point, she's up in the sky on a broom with another witch, and they look down and they see the Uffington White Horse, the famous geoglyph on the chalklands of the southwest of England, right? They fly over that. And Tiffany says, it's not what a horse looks like, it's what a horse be. So what she's simultaneously perceiving is that is a representation of a horse, but it's not what a horse looks like. If you got AI to show me a horse, well, you can imagine what AI would show you a horse. But that's not what a horse be. So much more is there in the Uffington geoglyph. That's what a horse be. It's like that thing about what science tells us reality is, but what it feels like to be human and alive are different and sometimes conflicting sensations. And so I think because of that experience that each of us has, however briefly and however successfully or unsuccessfully or whatever, we're trying to come to terms with things that clash. That clash. And so you say, is there light at the end of the tunnel? Well, yeah, but that won't be the end of anything. That will just be a period in whatever is beyond the tunnel. It won't be the end of anything.
And what you're saying also applies to, say, the COVID era, because we were told by, quote unquote, the science that there was a deadly pandemic, and what we felt and saw was nothing of the sort.
Yeah. So it's very conflicting all the time, because, you're being told something by people you trust often, or people that you're invited to trust. But then if that bumps heads with and conflicts with what you feel, then as an individual, and then to some extent collectively as a society, depends what happens, there's a feeling of that's not all there is. That's incomplete. That narrative is not all there is. And when that moment comes for the individual or for enough people, It doesn't have to be 51%. It just needs to be some people. And they find each other. And obviously something like the internet and social media enabled people like us to find each other where we might previously have been isolated. I mean, I get contacted all the time, but still to this day by people who said, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was going mad, but I listened to you on GB News or wherever, and it kept me sane. Because I thought, no, it's not just me. And so, you know, obviously the internet was created probably malevolently by DARPA and all of the rest of it as a means to harvest data about all of us. But the flip side of that coin was that at the same time, it enabled people to find each other. And that has been and is being the undoing of the grand narrative, because people are going, nah, see that thing they're saying about Build Back Better? That's bollocks, that. And enough people were able to find each other at the same time and share that thought to think, yeah, it's not just me. I think that's bollocks. And so does he, and so does she, and so does she, and so does he. You know, and that has kept us all going. But yes, you make a good point that COVID was simultaneously what we were being told, and then it was, yeah, but when I look with my own eyes, the two things are different. Now, where is the resolution for that conflict? Well, we're still trying to work that out.
Give me a final insight.
I am optimistic because I think that all of it is it's a much grander experience than we are capable of perceiving in our brief span of time and with our limited senses. I think there's so much more going on. And I think inevitably there are big stories that get told, grand narratives, and sometimes and for certain periods they are benign and they work and they're helpful, but then they go sour. They can go off and they can be no longer serving the need, and so other stories rise. And I think what's happening with the collective coming together that's been enabled by social media and the internet is that people are coming together and beginning, and it's not an ending, it's just the next stage. People are coming together and realizing that there's a better story to be told. There's a better story to tell. And so this sour story that's gone bad after a period of time is being replaced in real time as we speak by a better story, and that will carry those of us that want to tell it and take part in it to the next stage. It'll feel like a circle, but it's just a line without a beginning and without an end. That's what I think.
All right, Neil, how can I follow you?
Oh, well, I'm on X, for example. At the Coast Guy. That's what people call me. I used to make a television series called Coast, and people would come up to me in the street and they didn't know my name, but they would say, "You're the Coast Guy." So I just took that as a badge of honour. I have a YouTube channel. You find me. I've got a Patreon presence. You can find me on patreon.com. You can find me on YouTube. Just Google my name. Just YouTube my name and you'll find my content. On my channel, I do a lot of history, a lot of contemplation of things archaeological and historical, which for reasons we've been discussing for the last hour or so have morphed and metamorphosed and changed over the time. I do a lot of sort of ranting and raving about the iniquities of the present moment. I interview some lovely people, fascinating people like you. I'll have you on my channel. We'll talk on my channel.
I'll do it.
Yeah, I'm out there. You can find me. And I write books. I've got about 13, 14 books out there. You can find them wherever you find your books. Your favourite bookshop or online or whatever.
Neil Oliver, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Pleasure, Jeremy. Anytime. First of many, I hope.